So we are recording this event. So while people join, we'll send out the recording afterwards, so people can catch up on areas any areas they've missed. But we shall kick off for the folk who've joined us at the top of the hour. So welcome to this Gardener Systems webinar. If you've not joined webinars on Teams before, you'll see there is a Q&A button. So if you do have any questions while we go through the event, do drop them in there, and myself and Richie will do our best to answer them as we go. So today's webinar is covering an area which has been really interesting to us actually here at Gardener Systems, and been an area that we've seen change quite a lot over the last 18 months. I probably should introduce myself before I start. Actually, I'm Paul Stringflow, CTO here at Gardeners. And been working in the industry for just over 30 years. From obviously started as a young boy with these young boyish good looks that I have. So yeah, Richie, you probably should laugh less when I say things like that. About how young I look. But yeah, it's been a really interesting topic for us, and something that, as I mentioned, I've seen over the last 18 months gain some real traction amongst our customer base, and actually been a real change in perspective of the way that people are kind of looking at this technology. And the technology we're talking about today is SASE. So this is kind of an evolution of kind of communications, an evolution of security, and for many of the organisations, they've become very aware of the need to transform the way they address both connectivity and security inside of their businesses. They need to address the demands for flexible connectivity alongside tackling kind of the ever-changing and ever-evolving cyber threat that kind of meets with the way that we change our infrastructure and change the way we operate as businesses on the whole, particularly over kind of the last 4 or 5 years. So to help me provide some insight into kind of SASE and the SASE landscape, I'm joined today by Richie Fry from Cato. So hi Richie, thanks for joining us today. How are you?
Very well, thank you, Paul. Thanks for inviting me, and hello to all our audience members.
So yeah, nice to have you with us today, Richie. And I suppose before we get started, probably the polite thing to do is get you to give yourself a little introduction, tell us who you are, and what it is you do.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So, indeed, as you say, my name is Richie Fry. I am the Channel SE here at Cato Networks. Channel SE is an interesting role. The word comes from the Latin for not a real SE. So basically, my role is to support our partner community, and in this case, great partner we've got here with Gardener Systems. So it's very, very nice to meet you all, and hoping for a really good session, actually.
So if people don't take anything else from today, they can take both some Latin-based and channel-based humour. I got the channel gag. I don't know whether everybody else will get the channel gag. Email me afterwards, and I'll explain if need be. So look, everybody's here today then to learn a little bit about SASE. We've entitled the event "What is SASE and Do I Need It?" So seems like a really sensible place to start, Richie, with SASE. What is it?
Right. Yeah, that is a really good start, Paul. So I think officially, SASE stands for Secure Access Service Edge. It's a term established by Gartner, and it defines a cloud native framework, right? And this framework integrates networking and security functions into this unified service, specifically with the aim of accommodating those modern hybrid network and cloud architectures. Now, somewhere I've got a slide, actually. Let me just get this slide up here and share, because I think this might help us a little bit here, Paul. Can you just, have I done that right?
Yes, you have. So far, so good.
Fantastic. Right, great. So, all right, I'll take a step back. Let's add a little bit more depth, to this now then. So, it's 2019, right? And Gartner introduced Secure Access Service Edge, SASE. Right? And what is it? It's a comprehensive solution. It's designed to address key challenges in enterprise IT. And these include vendor sprawl, digital transformation, and workforce mobility. The concept, and they detailed it as a white paper, sort of proposed a cloud-based framework that seamlessly integrates networking and security technologies. Now, to logically separate the underlying technologies that form SASE, if you like, Gartner developed two distinct magic quadrants. And I hope everybody on the call is comfortable with Gartner magic quadrants. They're fairly well known now, I guess. And they developed them for the two constituent elements, right? They had the network-centric magic quadrant. They knew it as WAN edge, and that encompassed various network technology, but most notably, and it was often referred to as well, actually, as SD-WAN, right? Sometimes that magic quadrant was just called SD-WAN. Now, conversely, the SSE, the Security Service Edge magic quadrant, that focused on the security technologies, right? Such as what the probably the most popular ones here, Cloud Access Security Broker, CASB, Zero Trust Network Access, ZTNA or ZTNA, and Secure Web Gateway, or SWIG as we like to know them, for internet governance. So in essence, WAN Edge combines the network elements, SSE consolidates the security elements, and SASE converges both of them to form that sort of complete, unified cloud-based platform.
So you talk there actually, about Gartner, and I think most of the people on the call know who Gartner are as an analyst firm. And one of the things I know about Gartner is Gartner love a magic quadrant. Their whole life they love to put people in boxes on a graph. But you mentioned there that they'd done a one edge magic quadrant and they'd done one for SSE. So is there a SASE version of that? Is there a SASE magic quadrant?
Yeah, okay, so well noted because I didn't mention one there, right? And the reason being, initially, Gartner did not publish a dedicated Magic Quadrant specifically for SASE. As you point out, when I was speaking, they did it for the two subcomponents, right? WAN Edge and SSE, and that absence led to a period where kind of and everybody on the call probably saw this, right? Where numerous vendors claimed to be leaders in the newly formed and fantastically buoyant SASE market. But the problem is they didn't have that clear leaderboard defined, if you like, so it was hard to dispute anybody's claims. Gartner, of course, has now since rectified this, and they have introduced the single vendor SASE Magic Quadrant, and that kind of affirms SASE role as that big unified solution. And this solution is, what is it good for? Well, it's exceptionally well suited to modern hybrid network and cloud architectures. And it's certainly probably more appropriate than traditional firewall centric approaches, I think.
So well, that's good. We've got a magic quadrant because is life ever complete without one? I think a lot of us feel. I just want to pick up on something else you talked about though there before. Maybe just to get a little bit more detail about what SaaS is about. So when you were talking before, you talked about a selection of technologies. You talked about secure web gateways, you talked about CASB. You talked about technologies that are aren't particularly new. These are relatively well established,
Mm.
mature technologies, if you like, and tend to be popular in their own right as kind of standalone propositions. So, is SASE kind of, is SASE using what is already mature and well established stuff? Where do those bits sit in?
So you're absolutely right, Paul. I mean, SASE didn't really bring in any new technology as such, right? It's much more about combining, consolidating, converging, whichever you prefer. What platformization is another one doing the rounds, right? And it's about, getting those bringing together those existing cloud-centric networking and security technologies. Now, to be fair, the SASE list of technologies has certainly grown since 2019, particularly I think down that SSE side. But even those additional technologies, right, they've, I think, emerged independent of SASE. And they've been then incorporated where Gartner sees it appropriate.
Yeah, and I think and I think that's interesting because I think from a kind of a buyer's perspective, and most of the people I think on this call, are making kind of technology decisions or making technology recommendations to their companies. Sometimes when you hear a new trade phrase like SASE, that can be that can be a little bit scary. Should I be taking a punt on this kind of new technology that we've come up with? But I think it can be quite comforting a lot of the time, and helpful that actually lots of these things bring together mature technologies, and maybe looking at new ways of delivering that. And but interestingly, I think with that idea. So if what SASE is built from is all of these kind of mature technologies and bring them together, yeah, why has SASE itself become a thing?
Yeah, so it's a really good point. The why, why did we do all this? Well, I think to do that, we need to go back in time a little bit again, perhaps even prior to 2019. Let's maybe even take a decade ago, right? Let's think about it. The most common enterprise architecture was relatively simple, right? We had users operating from headquarters and remote offices, and they had their data and their resources, right? Their applications. They were primarily housed in physical data centers. Access for remote offices and HQs to the DCs. How did we do that? Did it via MPLS, right? We had a smaller, or certainly I would say smaller than now anyway, percentage of remote workers perhaps utilizing VPNs to access resources in these data centers. So that traditional architecture, that fundamentally had to change to I think two significant shifts. The first and probably the biggest was cloud migration, right? Part of digital transformation. I think people tend to use those interchangeably, and the other one was user mobility. So let's look at cloud migration. Those initiatives led to like a substantial migration of data and resources to cloud-hosted platforms such as AWS and Azure. And also running alongside that, right, we had that increased adoption of SaaS services like Salesforce, Office 365. Now, despite this shift, many organizations still retained some services, right, within their headquarters and physical data centers, particularly, in the earlier days. So the other big change, user mobility, that also evolved quite dramatically, I think. Prior to 2020, flexible work arrangements, including the occasional working from home day, normally a Friday, right, Paul? You go on the road on a Friday, and all of a sudden it seemed to be a little bit quieter on the roads. Right? It's because more and more people started to work from home. That was becoming increasingly common. And then, of course, right, COVID-19, right, that significantly accelerated that trend. And then a large percentage, often 100% or all of the percentages of the workforce rapidly transitioned to remote and home work, right? And the other thing about that was I think that rapid shift sort of underscored the limitations of traditional VPNs for large scale secure access. And I think, many companies hit the buffers of their VPN solutions overnight. I think a lot of us will remember that, right? Now, consequently, out of that, the modern hybrid network is defined by the dispersal of applications, data, and users, right? Everything, everywhere, all at once, right? The hybrid architecture, it's specifically designed to meet the combined demands of both the modern cloud environments, a mobile workforce, as well as supporting those sorts of retained elements of the traditional infrastructure of physical data centers and remote branches. And I think that's something that traditional networking and security solutions, I think they've proven to be ill suited for.
Yeah, and I think actually that's a really good point because and you mentioned kind of that traditional use of VPN is, I think, a good example of this. And I'm sure there's probably people on the call who witness the same thing. I mean, one of the biggest things that we heard from our customers here at Gardeners, when people suddenly en masse had to go and work from home, was the amount of times we got involved with customers who were struggling with VPNs. So, their VPN infrastructure had been designed for 50 users, and now there's 5,000 users trying to hit it. And they're all kind of connecting in and tromboning back out to the internet, and that was not that was just not sustainable. That was not a way to operate. So people needed to find new ways to operate really quickly. And I think a couple of really other interesting elements you've raised as well. I think the kind of disparate infrastructure that we have today, this idea that our infrastructure very rarely now means lots of users in an office connected to things in a data center that we own. That might still be true. Some people might be in an office.
Mhm.
Some of our infrastructure may still well be housed inside of a data center, but the likelihood is we've also got users working in remote locations. We've also got users working, accessing services that might be SaaS based. They might be co-load somewhere else. They may be built in a number of ways. And I think the challenge that presents in these kind of disparate working environments and disparate networks is how on earth do you apply a consistent experience, both consistent in terms of the way we connect and kind of the user experience in terms of connectivity, but also how do we make sure from a security professional's point of view, for example, how do we make sure that we offer a consistent and reliable security framework for all of those users, and I think, as you mentioned before, that this has kind of driven this change, potentially driven this change into this kind of world of SASE, because the traditional ways we did this didn't necessarily fulfill that requirement well enough for us. So I suppose my question is, how does SASE go about solving this?
Right, yeah. You're getting right to the heart of the matter, right? So I think SASE solves this by making the networking more cloud centric and application centric, indeed as well, right? And it hosts the security functionality on a cloud platform. And what does that mean? It means it's more, strategically placed, if you like, to provide these services to branch office users or remote users accessing applications in the likes of Azure or AWS and the SaaS services like Office 365. However, and it's worth bearing this in mind, it's also equally compatible with connecting branch offices to traditional data centers, right? It's built, as I said earlier, to service that modern hybrid architecture. Let's break the two up a moment, though, Paul. I think SD-WAN, let's look at that in isolation, I think. That, of course, is the solution to the problem of the legacy MPLS architecture. Right? MPLS was designed to connect remote sites to data centers and HQs, but it's not really suited to internet or cloud-based data and applications, right? In most instances, if you think back, and even very often out there today, right, access to cloud and internet services in an MPLS architecture, then you have to go via the data center to get internet breakout, right? And this hair pinning, or to use a phrase you mentioned earlier, tromboning, right? That often sending the traffic the wrong way often leads to significant latency issues. I mean, extreme example, but you could be sending your traffic, 1,000 miles in the wrong direction to turn it back around again. Right? And the other thing about MPLS, of course, generally we're talking about much lower rates of bandwidth, so that the bandwidth between that site and DC was also a constricting factor as well, right? As well as the latency. So how does SD-WAN solve this? So SD-WAN solves this by being able to use direct internet links. Pretty simple, really, at every site, meaning direct access to cloud-based services. With SD-WAN, you can connect remote sites, DCs, HQs to each other, right, securely over internet links. Or if you wanted to, you could maintain that MPLS for enterprise WAN traffic if you like. The thing to bear in mind about SD-WAN is it's agnostic actually of the type of connectivity you provide, right? It's because it's an overlay technology, so you can use MPLS, internet links, Starlink, whatever you want. SD-WAN also brings to the table abilities like load balancing over multiple connected links. That was always should be something simple, but actually was always a bit of a challenge in the traditional routing methods. Application awareness. That's really important, being able to, application aware and prioritization, and also elements of WAN optimization as well, like packet duplication and TCP acceleration, all that sort of really, really good stuff. Now, the security piece then, so by placing the security elements in the cloud rather than firewalls at branch offices or HQs, it's much more strategically placed for your mobile workforce when they access the cloud, SaaS, and internet services, right? As well as being en route for people in remote offices that are accessing the cloud. So another massive advantage of SASE, for instance, over traditional firewall appliances, of course, is scalability. Thinking back to what we were just saying about VPN as well, actually, right? You've got no more worrying about hitting the buffers of your hardware or being unable to deploy new features due to the fact that you're already hitting capacity. The cloud, if you think there's one thing it's incredibly famous for, is elasticity, right? Now, I take that a step further. If you go the route of the single vendor SASE, of course, then you can start to address the issues of vendor sprawl.
Yeah, and I think And again, I think actually that's an interesting point. Maybe we'll come back to that actually about kind of vendor sprawl, because I think some of the complexity that multiple vendors in our security stack introduces, it kind of creates. I mean, I love the phrase, and I use it quite often actually, that kind of complexity is the enemy of cybersecurity. Because
Mm,
there's a potential for kind of those gaps between them. But we'll maybe come back to that. And I mean, I think in terms of what you've just been covering there, though, that idea of starting to move that that what has that kind of disparate approach to dealing with this problem into that kind of single cloud operated space where and I talked before about some of the challenges that you get around how do we apply consistency of experience, how do we apply consistency of security experience, so wherever our users are accessing any of our internal corporate resources from, we still manage to apply to that the same level of control. Doesn't matter whether they're sat in a head office, doesn't matter sat in a coffee shop, on a train, sat at home, none of those things matter. Doesn't matter whether the service is in the cloud, in the data center, in a colo
mm,
facility, we get the same kind of consistent experience, consistent control. I think that's hugely important. That sounds from what you're saying. That's the kind of thing that SASE is addressing. And I think from our experience, particularly over the last 18 months or so, we've actually seen a real shift from people looking at SASE because they were looking at it, looking at modifying the way they delivered connectivity, to looking at SASE because they're looking to change the way and modify the way they deliver security in these kind of much more disparate cloud-centric worlds that we tend to live in. So I suppose another question for you then. So you talk about SASE very generically. You talked about SASE in terms of what it delivers, and
mm,
what that means to organizations, some of the problems it solves. We talked about Gartner before, and as we say, they love a magic quadrant, and
mm,
vendors like Cato who sit in the top right hand quadrant, they that marks them out as leaders. Some of the people on the call know I do some work with an analyst firm called GigaOM over in the US, and
mm,
I know in GigaOM's SASE reports, SASE radar reports, Cato again are highlighted as probably the strongest vendor in that
mm.
space. So I suppose I suppose a question for me, maybe a question for some of the other people on the call. They will be aware that SASE has grown hugely in popularity as both a term, but as a technology approach. And most of the vendors that we know, maybe from the firewall space particularly, and now starting to have SASE solutions, or already have SASE solutions, and a SASE approach for their customers. But obviously, Cato come out really well in these kind of reports. Is seen very much as a leader in this space. You talked before about potentially help define this space. So what is it that Cato, what is it about Cato's approach to SASE that marks them
Mm.
out as that little bit different, and delivers additional value for customers?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So I think, look, we could grasp at features and spend all day doing that, combating features. But I think our single standout USP, if you like, or our feature is that we were built from day one, right, to be a cloud-based platform delivering, and this bit's the important bit, the networking and the security services. I think that's our differentiator. We're not security services with a network bolt on. It was built from day one to be both. Now, does that sound familiar? Right? Because there I could literally be describing Gartner's definition of SASE, right? And if you're suspicious of coincidences, then you might conclude that Cato's built this platform to exactly match Gartner's vision. The only downside of that theory is that Cato was founded in 2015, right? That's when that platform was built, and Gartner didn't create and define the term SASE until 2019. Of course, the our founder and CEO Shlomo Kramer is famously somebody who innovates way ahead of his time. Checkpoint being a great example. So look, Paul, if I'm going to show you, I think let me just I think pull a slide up, because to me just rattling on and giving you an overview of the solution is going to be a bit hard work. Let me just find the slide that I want there. I'll line that up, and right, so that share button. There we go. There we go. Could you see that, Paul?
I can see it.
Fantastic. Right. Okay. Let's take a look at the oh, I've just got something covering my slide up there, so I can't see it. Right, there we go. Okay, let's take a look at it at a fairly high level. And there's quite a bit to our solution, so I've got a little bit of clicking to do here. First of all, let's take a look at the networking piece. Right? After all, we have to connect our users and our apps and the data to the network. Now, we can easily connect your traditional remote offices, your HQs, your data centers, and whilst at the same time connecting our new cloud and SaaS-based applications. Right? Now, our preferred method to do this, to be absolutely honest, is to use Cato SD-WAN, right? And that gives you some great advantages like, the great networking features. But we could also connect sites and services using, our customers' existing infrastructure and hardware if they support IPsec, right? We could do it that way. Now, for remote users, we have our Zero Trust Network Access client. And for our non-human devices, right? This is a popular subject, isn't it, Paul? We've got IoT and an OT solution as well. Well, now, when users connect to the Cato platform, they take advantage of our global private network, right? No more leaving it to chance with public services and public internet. It doesn't matter how you connect to the platform, whether you use our SD-WAN, whether you use a third-party IPsec tunnel, whether you use our ZTNA client, whether you connect as a third-party contractor or BYOD, more popular subjects, whichever way you do it, the performance improvement that you'll get and the security that you'll get will remain the same. So, by the way, Paul, slightly off topic, another issue I hear a lot about, certainly I was at a big event at Excel a couple of months ago, and it was the biggest thing I was hearing. Patching fatigue, right? And the fear of another release of a CVE, right? Now, there's particular firewall vendors out there, perhaps that are releasing these on an awful regular basis, right? And it can feel like a full-time job, keeping up with emergency upgrades. Well, welcome to Cato Networks. You don't have to worry about that anymore, right? We take that headache away, and we'll maintain and patch what we call our sockets for you. So anyway, once we've connected you to the high-speed Cato platform, then we'll provide our best-in-class security services. Additionally, all users benefit from high-speed connectivity globally, by the way, and smart egress. And what does that mean? That means you will exit our platform via the POP nearest the service you're using. Now, usually, if we say Office 365, usually that'll be in the same building, right? So you're subjected to the very best experience possible, if you like. You're on board the POP, you've got a private network to anywhere in the world, and then exit in the same building. So let's take perhaps a whistle-stop tour of some of those security technologies. We obviously won't be able to go into much depth, not in the time we've got, but if we take firewall as a service, that's something that offers perhaps, those traditional firewall services, allowing, denying traffic in the traditional manner, but in a more modern as a service delivery. We've got our SWG, or SWIG as people tend to refer to it, Secure Web Gateway. And that ensures enterprise can enforce policies against either individual websites or categories of websites, right? So, for example, blocking adult material or gambling, whatever you want to do in line with corporate policy. IPS, that's our intrusion prevention system, and it's able to detect suspicious activity that could result in or could be unauthorized and malicious access. DNS security, that's an extremely important one, actually. DNS manipulation, that's a major avenue of malicious behavior. Amongst other things, it'll help protect you against phishing attacks, for instance. NGAM, that's our next generation anti-malware solution. And it's the first time I've mentioned it today. I think that's pretty good, right? We leverage AI. So then we can detect malware, even if it tries to evade those traditional hashing methods, fingerprinting methods, because these days they're being made polymorphic, the ability to change very, very minutely and evade a fingerprint, but AI can combat that. ZTNA, or Zero Trust Network Access, very popular subject. This one often does a project in its own right? Yes, Paul. That connects remote users, and quite simply, it connects remote users to applications, right? And it does it, though, in a far more secure and efficient manner than traditional VPN. So if I've put some meat on that bone, VPN connects or let's put it the other way. Unlike VPN, ZTNA connects users directly to the application, right? Rather than the entire network, which is what VPN does. And ZTNA connects you to that application with the least privileged access required to achieve the task. Now, Cato ZTNA, also continuously verifies the traffic whilst it's in session to look for suspicious and malicious activity. Now, I'll be honest with you, Paul, many solutions in the marketplace don't do this, right? They just connect and forget. So look out for that whilst you're looking around, guys, because that's actually really, really important, right? Just because someone connects with a good posture, sorry, doesn't mean they maintain that good and honest posture throughout the session. CASB, right. CASB stands for Cloud Access Security Broker. Certainly a very fast-growing sector, this. And basically, it's a technology suite that protects an enterprise's SaaS services. Right? You can control things like access to sites that aren't HIPAA compliant, for instance, if you're a medical company. Right? You can control activities such as upload or share depending on the risk rating of the SaaS application, which we have a large catalog, many thousands of applications in a catalog that we rate how risky they are. You can also control activities based on whether this is a corporate or a personal tenant, right? So, for instance, you may allow full access to your corporate Google Drive. This could be Office 365 as well, by the way, but let's say Google Drive, right? So restrict that or allow full access to your corporate Google Drive, but restrict uploading to people's personal Google Drive or OneDrive or whatever. Because if you think about it, uploading to a personal Google Drive, right, is a very easy route to data theft. Additionally, we have now enhanced Cato CASB with a shadow AI dashboard so that you can have complete sort of comprehensive visibility of those Gen AI applications that are being used. And we also back that up with a powerful policy engine so that you can govern and control generative AI use. Now, I know that's top of mind for many businesses that are out there right now. So DLP, data loss prevention, that takes that CASB concept, takes it a bit further and makes it data centric. So, for instance, you may block uploads of material that contain credit cards or GDPR or source code or anything that is secret or IP to you as a business. Remote browser isolation, RBI, that protects users if they stray into that gray area, right? Because not everything's black and white. That's a good site, that's a bad site. We've got gray areas of unknown sites and newly formed websites where we haven't been able to form an opinion yet. So what RBI does effectively provides you a read-only view of a website where you can't download any risky material, you can't get yourself into bother. And finally, we've got our IoT OT solution, IoT/OT, yes. And that creates an inventory. Think NIS2 compliance here. And it also allows you to control the movements of traffic of devices such as cameras, HVAC, robotic arms, and giving you full visibility as well. So we've got a couple of options on how a Cato platform is managed. One of the fantastic things about Cato, I think, is how easy the solution is to manage. And I hear this all the time. So actually, many of our customers, will run and manage their own Cato platform. Equally, Cato can also offer a fully managed service, including a last mile monitoring service, if you like, if the customer would like us to do that. That's where we can look after your internet links and raise faults and monitor them, etc. So that's our easy to use single management platform, contains all the analytics and all the audit facilities you'd expect, of course. But in addition, there is an XDR solution, right? And there is a full DEM, that digital experience management solution, to help NOC resolve user performance issues quicker. So, for example, with our DEM, a NOC operator could, within 20 seconds, identify that a user has got a CPU issue on his laptop or his Wi-Fi connection. isn't working properly. Paul, I'm nearly done. Let me just, can I just show one more slide a second? Because I'm aware that it should be after this. Yes. I've mentioned our global private network, and it's pretty important. So what, like I said, one of our USPs is that the platform doesn't rely on public services such as Google or the internet, right? The Cato network, it's built on private hardware in tier one data centers, such as there's three or four main ones, but such as Equinix, right? And therefore we share that accommodation with services such as Office 365. POPs are connected with redundant tier one private connections throughout the globe, right? So it is a global solution that offers performance. And actually, this one's the most important, I think. It's consistency. It's not just that it's faster, because sometimes the internet can be fast, but it's consistent, right? Every day you're going to get there or thereabouts the same sort of performance. And that can't be met by public internet or solutions that use, cloud solutions such as Google, for instance, to underpin their platforms. Now, all of our POPs offer all of our services, and I think this is important as well, right? We've currently got, in the region of 90 points of presence, including, for instance, 4 locations in China. So what I will say is this, right? With Cato, you're not penalized with reduced service just because you happen to be somewhere else in the world.
Yeah, and oh, I mean, there's a ton of stuff in what you've just covered, and actually that closing statement, though, I think that's a hugely important part of that, that idea that you are, regardless of where you connect from, you get the same experience. It's always the same experience. You're getting that. We talked right at the start, didn't we, about this kind of importance of consistency. So you're getting a consistent user experience, you're getting a consistent security experience, and they're a huge part of ensuring that as IT professionals, as businesses, we're allowing people to do their jobs by delivering a good, robust, and consistent experience, regardless of where. We're enabling people to do their jobs from wherever is the right place for them to do their jobs, as opposed to, well, actually, your experience is a bit better if you come and do it over here, or you get access to more stuff if you do it from over here. The fact that we have that control, I think, is massively important, and actually a really big part of why SASE is kind of growing in terms of in terms of popularity, and in terms of somewhere that people actually want to be starting to look, as they look at the way they're evolving both connectivity and evolving security. I thought what was also really interesting in what you covered was kind of that breadth of capability. So it feels like that idea that, you talked about Cato as a kind of a single vendor SASE. I think it's that idea that we can kind of come along to Cato and have Cato deliver for us all of those kind of security capabilities, and look to remove some of the complexity. But I mean, how does that compare to customers who maybe like to use multiple vendors to do things? They maybe take a best of breed approach in terms of, I'll use this vendor for this and this vendor for that. How does that compare to using a single vendor to deliver that?
Actually, Paul, as you were just sort of going on that subject, I just lined up. I promised last one. I've just lined up another slide, right? I particularly like this slide. So now, can I successfully share for the last, what will probably be the last time today, unless we come up with something else that I might need a slide for. There, hopefully, is that? Can you see my screen, Paul?
Yeah, got that.
Okay. So I love showing this. I love showing this slide because I think it does a really good job of visualizing what you've just said there, right? It's referred to as vendor sprawl, right? Where you've got all of these different vendors doing different jobs. And I think this slide gives us a tiny snapshot, right, of some of the issues associated with vendor sprawl. On average, a fairly small enterprise can have 32 security products. Larger enterprises, Paul, up to 70. Right. Now, the problem with point products is that they were never designed to work with each other. Right. So they don't fit together quite as smoothly as you'd like. And that's what you see here with the different shapes, right? And also, these are completely different technologies built by completely different people with completely different aims. Therefore, each technology requires a different learned skill. And depending on the size of the organization, that might require, very many multiple engineers. What I particularly like about this slide, though, is that it could mean many different things to different people. Right? I get, whenever I show this, I kind of try and get different views on what they think. But so let's look at those character figures there, right? We can see between the technologies, because like I say, they could be different things depending on your point of view. Now, you may see these figures as bad actors squeezing between the gaps that the point products leave, right? And I think that's probably just about the most popular feedback I tend to get, that that's what people think it is. But also very popular, you may see many different engineers required to run these multiple solutions. Right. Another bit of feedback I've had is maybe you see multiple vendor support engineers required to handle the support cases that you'll need to raise. Or maybe a smaller figure, but maybe, right, these are the finance team and the legal boffins required to run the multiple procurement routes. Now, to be honest, all of these options are actually equally relevant, right? And they probably just depend on what's top of your mind at the time. Now, one thing's for sure, though, multiple point products cause complexity. They result in an overload of uncoordinated information that can let hackers through the gaps. In simply, right, Kato's platform was designed from day one to integrate side by side these technologies under a single management platform. We eradicate those security gaps, we eliminate unnecessary duplication, and the whole thing is super easy to manage.
Yeah, and I think, and actually simplicity is hugely important. And I'm sure the people on this call, or the people watching the recording, will recognise the complexity that comes with trying to manage lots and lots of different vendors and some of the issues that presents. And I think that's it's a really good graphic actually in terms of those gaps between those products.
Mhm.
They're the areas where kind of the cyber threat breeds and the cyber threat looks to exploit. So that's the kind of its gaps in your security that cyber attackers are looking to exploit. That doesn't mean that one vendor solves all of the problems for everybody all of the time. There's always going to be a world where I think we're going to have multiple vendors. But actually, if there's areas where we can try and minimize that, simplify the management of that, simplify people's lives and who are challenged with trying to deal with cybersecurity risk and deal with the management of the tools, I think all of those are a good thing. Helps to reduce risk, but also lower operations costs as well. If we've got less tools to manage, we can automate across those tools. Then we can potentially lower some of those kind of management overheads. So, but that's been really useful, Richie. So I suppose my last question for you, there's going to be people on this call, people watching the recording later, might be looking at us going, well, this has been really interesting. This is, I understand some of the risk, I understand some of the change. I've got a little bit of an understanding now of where SASE might be able to address that for me. So I suppose the question they might be asking themselves though is SASE actually for me? So what are some of the good use cases that you see where you see SASE absolutely delivering real value?
Yeah, so I mean, to answer the question, the simple question is SASE for me, almost certainly, Paul. I'll give you some use cases for SASE, and we'll get a thought as to how many people this would affect, right? So, a really good use case: people who've undergone or planning to go through cloud transformation, right? Digital transformation, cloud migration, whatever you want to call it. I.e., it doesn't matter. Move data and applications to the cloud and SaaS services, and they want these to perform well and to remain secure. I'll add to that as well, actually, visibility. Actually, but we talk about that, but a lot of companies spent an awful lot of money on visibility products sort of over a decade ago, and it put them in the data center. And then the problem with the cloud transformation and migration is that we bypass the data center, so they're just sitting there not seeing the picture at all. So visibility is another big one. Businesses with multiple sites, right, that need connecting to each other, and at the same time the cloud services and the apps. Organizations with remote users, right, including contractors and BYOD, because we've got solutions for them, particularly if you're doing that right now with legacy VPN. Right, it's time to give that a good think now and start to adopt the zero trust model. It's probably for another time. Zero trust and ZTNA are two different things. ZTNA is a subset of zero trust. But I mean, all of these things that we've talked about, you're going to want to bring them all in for a full zero trust model. Businesses that lack visibility, particularly, as I said, actually, particularly if you've invested money and things in the data center and found that's been bypassed, but visibility into things like IoT, and perhaps a fresh outlook on visibility in terms of digital experience monitoring. How long does a support case end up with an engineer when actually you could quite simply press a button and say, "Oh, you've got a CPU issue." Organizations who are struggling with vendor sprawl, which is what we said last off, right? And by that I mean, too many point solutions, trying to address all the network and security requirements that they need to address.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think all sound like good use cases, and are all use cases that we've seen, and I think that, people who are looking at some of these challenges and looking at modifying the way that they either deliver connectivity and most certainly deliver security into those environments, I think SASE absolutely should be something that they, you know, won't necessarily be the answer in the end. When you've done that evaluation, you've done that due diligence, but I think is a really good starting point. And should absolutely be on somebody's kind of radar of things that we're looking at evolving the way we do both communications and the way that'll impact security. Let's go and take a look at this kind of SASE space. So I think so some great examples there. So well, look, Richard, this has been great. Really insightful, really informative. I think we've kind of gone from a relatively high level. What on earth is SASE, down to some of the detail about how we do that and why somebody like Cato is a really good partner potentially going forward for you as a customer looking to address this space, and why Cato are absolutely seen as leaders in this space by analyst firms out there who are kind of doing that measure across the industry. So, Richie, I just want to thank you for your time. There's a couple of things about what you've covered today that have really stuck with me as well. As by way of a recap, I think that simplification is hugely important. It's a hugely important value for SASE. And I thought that kind of last graphic really summed that up well. Trying to remove some of those gaps where cyber bad actors might thrive. I think that's been really useful. I think that kind of consistency of experience is hugely helpful. I think it's really difficult when you talked about kind of digital experience monitoring that you've got in the Cato platform. I think that can be really difficult for people delivering IT infrastructure. When you get inconsistent experience, it's a difficult thing to solve. But actually, a consistent security experience, I think, is really important as well. And I think being able to do that, with across a comprehensive network. You mentioned something before about you're never a second class citizen. You're always, regardless of where you're connecting into the Cato network, you're getting the same services, you're getting the same experience. I think all those things are a hugely important part. So before we finish up, Richie, is there anything you want to add to that as kind of a key takeaway when it comes to SASE?
I think maybe the main thing I think I'd probably say, when we look at a single vendor SASE solution, like KO, what are you getting? Better security, better performance, better visibility.
So, sounds like a great way to sum up and finish. So, Richie, look, thanks for your time. Really appreciate that. So I think I found it really insightful. Learned a lot today. For our attendees and those watching on the recordings, well, if you're watching on the recording, you already know this next bit. But we will be sending out some follow up information, which will include this recording. So, like I say, if you're watching the recording, you've already had that. But we'll also be sending out some information about how you can find out a bit more about Cato, how you can find out more about what gardeners are doing in the SASE space, and how we're helping some of our other customers as well. And we can also look at things like where you can kind of get a more detailed look at the way SASE might kind of fit inside of your organization. So do look out for that email, and our sales teams will be in touch, but the email will come from Josh. And so that's us done. So appreciate your time that you spent with us today. Hope you've all found that really insightful and really useful. Richie, again, one more time, thank you for your time as well. That's been a great session. So yeah, thanks everyone for attending, and we look forward to seeing you all on our next webinar. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, everyone.